Good afternoon and good morning to those in WA, and welcome to the webinar for Fremantle Seaweed. My name's Tim Eisenhower. I work for On Market, and we are the licensed platform or intermediary that's helping Fremantle Seaweed with their crowdsourced funding campaign. Agenda today, we're going to run for probably up to 60 minutes, depending on how many questions we get and how long it takes us to answer them. But I'm going to provide some details for the campaign and for the investment opportunity. I'm then going to introduce two of the senior management team for Fremantle Seaweed. They're going to give a short overview presentation and hopefully answer a lot of your questions in that presentation. Then we're going to move to questions from the crowd. And I ask you online, and there's a lot of you online. We're nearing over 100 that are there and growing. The CTA for you guys, the call to action for you guys is to use that Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions that Chris and May can answer for you. But just some details firstly around the raise. Fremantle Seaweed, they're looking to raise up to $5 million. The campaign is currently in their expression of interest phase, and I encourage you, if you haven't expressed your interest, to do so. We have over 2,200 expression of interest, people wanting to buy shares. It's a really large number. And approximate demand, cumulative demand for those 2,200 is up over $7 million. So it's been very popular, very engaging, and yeah, that number is going to grow over the next couple of days. Importantly, and this is a date for your diary, by virtue of coming into the expression of interest period, you'll be invited into a private deal room period on Thursday. That's this Thursday, September 25th. So for everyone that's registered their interest, you get a private or red carpet sort of entry into the private deal room. Publicly, then we'll open next week, roughly Monday or Tuesday. We'll open to the public, but for that sort of 52, 74-hour period, you'll have an opportunity to come in. So please remember that if you are a retail investor, there's a limit of $10,000. If you want to bid more than $10,000, you need to be a sophisticated investor to come into this offer. So upon Thursday, you'll receive the offer document, the prospectus. I know there's been a lot of questions around people wanting to see a prospectus or an offer document for the company. That'll all be available for you on Thursday. Today's webinar is to answer a lot of questions in and around that. I'd like now to introduce the management team for Fremantle Seaweed. We have Chris, CEO and co-founder, and May, who's the business development manager. So I'm going to hand over to you, Chris and May. Chris is going to share his screen and talk through a short overview of that. And then, as I mentioned, if you have any questions, there's a couple coming in already. If you have any questions, please use that Q&A box to ask your question, and we'll get to them after Chris and May's presentation. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks for that, Tim. Thank you for the intro. And yeah, thanks for everyone for joining. We've been quite overwhelmed by the amount of support. As Tim said, over 2,000 expressions of interest, and appreciate it takes time to submit it. So yeah, really, thankful for you all being here. As Tim introduced me, I'm Chris Kuiper, co-founder and CEO. I am a seaweed farmer, so that's me out on the boat, doing what I love, which is farming seaweed. And yeah, really proud to say that Fremantle Seaweed is a company that's taking climate action, and it's not happening in a lab. It's not an idea on a PowerPoint slide. It's happening right now. We've got Asparagopsis seaweed growing on our long lines at our 32-hectare seaweed farm here in Fremantle. All right. So why are we doing this? So methane is a really potent greenhouse gas. It's 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as far as the warming effect goes. And cattle produce a lot of methane. So it's 10% of Australia's global greenhouse gas emission, 5% globally, which is more than all the planes, trains, and ships combined. So it's a significant amount. Then it's tricky as well because it's cattle farmers who provide an incredibly important social service by feeding the world with beef and dairy products. So we really need to be able to provide cattle farmers with the tools they need to be able to reduce methane emissions and and do it in a way that's cost effective, and a natural product that doesn't affect their product, being the beef and dairy. There's a lot of pressure now on cattle farmers. They are really starting to, see all these looming carbon taxes. There's changing consumer expectations. So Harvey Beef did a study where they saw that something like 15% of consumers are willing to pay more for carbon or methane reduced products. Like I said, we've got these looming import taxes. So to supply beef and dairy into Europe, you're looking at having a carbon tax now. Um, Supermarkets, so for cattle farmers selling their products into Coles and Woolies, supermarkets now have what they call scope 3 emission targets. They know that cattle are the biggest part of their agricultural emissions. So they're looking to reduce those emissions, and it's called the insetting of carbon emissions. And the one I always found interesting is the banks. So cattle farmers, as they borrow money for their operations, now are getting pressure from the banks to reduce emissions because the banks also have scope 3 emission targets. So this is our solution, and it's an amazing Australian innovation through CSIRO, and they discovered the Asparagopsis seaweed, which is the picture you can see there of a mesh growing on our seaweed farm, that if you feed it to cattle at just a small amount, so it's 63 grams a day, which is just a handful, it reduces the cattle's methane emission by 80%. So a significant reduction, but it also provides the cattle farmer with a 7% feed conversion efficiency. And that means that the cattle farmer needs 7% less feed to get the cow to the same weight. And that's what the cattle farmer is after. The feed is a huge cost for them. So for them to be able to reduce the feed amount, the cattle farmers we've spoken to would be happy with a 1% feed conversion efficiency. So it is the way that we're looking to get our Asparagopsis feed supplement to, as many cattle farmers as we can by providing them that feed conversion efficiency. So we have completed over 4.5, 5 years of R&D now, figuring out how to grow Asparagopsis seaweed on a seaweed farm. It was commercialized in 2020 when I founded Fremantle Seaweed, and it has taken some time. It had never been what we call domesticated or grown on commercial aquaculture equipment before. So we had to figure out the life cycle, a process called tetrasporogenesis. I hear everyone go, what's tetrasporogenesis? Well, it's the process where we adjust the environmental cues, so the water temperature and sunlight, to get spore release from the reproductive material of the seaweed. So we're fortunate we work with one of Australia's leading seaweed scientists, Dr. Margie Rule from Drift Consulting. We have the seaweed farm, so we've got those research pieces completed now to be able to scale up production of our Asparagopsis. So this is how we do it. We collect broodstock. We're allowed to collect up to 20 kilograms of Asparagopsis taxiformis and then 200 kilograms of Asparagopsis armata. Broodstock is just seaweed that grows naturally on the reefs, and we have a license through WA Fisheries to do that. We then hatch and nurse those cultures, and I've got a bit of show and tell here. I'll see if I can hold it up to the screen. So there's some baby Asparagopsis tetrasporophytes. I don't know how well it's actually showing up, but we need to get really clean cultures, and it's quite a painstaking process, because when you collect seaweed, you don't just collect Asparagopsis, you collect all other types of seaweed and diatoms and everything that lives in the ocean. So you have to really get a very clean culture. And then at that point, we do the tetrasporogenesis process, which gives us tetraspores, and we settle those tetraspores out onto substrate. So here's one of our substrate trials. The substrate we use is basically just rope that hangs off the long lines you can see in sort of the background picture there. And from there, it grows from a very small, sort of fuzzy red looking bit of Asparagopsis seaweed into the full gametophyte, which is about 20 centimeters long. So we grow it out on our long lines. Fortunately, in Western Australia, we get a really long season here. get about 10 to 11 months of Asparaginus taxiformis and 3 months of Asparaginus armata, so the seasons cross over. We then harvest, so that's a picture of us pulling up some grow lines from our old boat. So um, we have a new boat that's on order that it kind of automates a lot of this process, and we use machines now instead of mixed big arms there. Once we've harvested it, we process it. For us, that means putting it in an industrial centrifuge, which is like a big washing machine on spin dry. We spin all the water off of it. 100 kilograms of wet Asparagopsis turns into 10 kilograms of dried Asparagopsis. And then we freeze dry it, and that locks in the active compound, which is the bromoform. And that's what we're really after. So I've got a bit more show and tell. So there's some Asparagopsis freeze-dried product we have there. And that's what we then feed to the cows. It's pretty simple really effective for feedlot and dairy cattle, where the cows, like in this picture of a feedlot, they go to the same place, a feed trough, to eat each day. And they have these big feed hoppers where they mix all what we call TMR, but total mixed rations that the cow eats. And then the product gets mixed at that point, gets put into these tractors that go around and then deliver their cattle's feed, but also the supplement. So it is a big opportunity. It's a massive market because we're talking about the global cattle feedlot and dairy sector. We've done a lot of analysis into the market size, and we've worked with CSIRO Future Feed plus another external consultant to really try and get a handle on these numbers. Some people go larger than we do, so we've taken what we believe is a conservative look at it, and we've based it on the known feedlot and dairy cows in the world, which is we have numbers for the US, for Europe, South America, Australia, but we don't really have numbers for India and China. So they aren't in these calculations. But the global market is massive. We're talking about $37 billion opportunity, which you would have seen in our recent material. For us, the Australian market is smaller. Most Australian cattle are grazing cattle, but we do have a feedlot and dairy sector as well. And then WA is a smaller part of that sector. So we have a 32 hectare aquaculture lease. That would be enough to do about 5,000 head of cattle. So our initial cattle farmers that we're working with, we've put in an application for an expansion lease, looking up to 3,000 hectares in the northwest of Western Australia. That size, we're looking at about 21% of the Australian market and 1% of the global market. We've based all this on our current yield. So I know I can grow 3 tons per hectare of Asparagopsis on our long lines, but it's year 5 of what should be a 100+ year journey and market. So there's a lot to go in yield. So if I look at some of the other seaweed species, I was fortunate enough to be sponsored by DFAT to go to South Korea and look at the nori industry there, where they're doing 30,000 hectares and they get around 20 tons per hectare of nori seaweed, which is another small red seaweed species. So my goal is to get yields up, but base all these numbers on what I know we can do. So why Fremantle seaweed? There is other companies growing Asparagopsis seaweed. For us, we're just really well located here in Western Australia. I call it the Goldilocks zone for Asparagopsis cultivation. It's not too hot, it's not too cold. Like I said, we're getting about 10 to 11 months of Asparagopsis taxiformis, and then 3 months of armata. So the seasons cross over. You look at the southern states of Australia, it's sort of a 3 to 4 month season of armata. And then the northern boundary seems to be Indonesia, similar. It's about 3 month season. So WA coastline is vast. We have a pretty small population here, and there is large areas we can access to grow seaweed at scale. So our first aquaculture lease that's fully approved by WA Fisheries since November 2022, 32 hectares, just about 2K south of the office where I'm sitting. And then the expansion lease we've applied for is in a group of islands called the Montebello Archipelago. And what we like about that area, Asparaginopsis is abundant up there. There's a whole bunch of oil and gas companies that are decommissioning their assets. So there's access to power, water, accommodation from these decommissioned oil and gas infrastructure. And, there's this amazing story where we can use the relics of the industrial era that have been a huge part of the problem and repurpose it into large scale seaweed aquaculture hub. We don't have competing interests such as commercial fishing. So there's access to large areas and the infrastructure needed to service it. So our product, Asparaginopsis seaweed, is a natural supplement you feed to cows to reduce their methane. There is other supplements available. So there's synthetic supplements. The one that's approved for use in Australia and Europe is called Bovaer, and it's a chemical called 3-NOP. I can't even pronounce the chemical name. Reduces methane by about 30%. Already in use. So um, cattle feedlots use the product and sell to Coles, and Coles sell that product as Coles' finest range. There was quite a bit of backlash, though, when Coles announced that. The consumer perception there that it's a chemical synthetic product as opposed to a natural product. So the way we grow Asparaginopsis is we grow it offshore on long lines in the ocean. We just let nature do what nature does best, which is growing seaweed in the ocean. But you can grow Asparaginopsis onshore in tanks. Um, Basically, you just do one part of the life cycle, the tetrasporophyte, and you don't do the tetrasporogenesis and gametophyte. It's a way we can get a really high quality product, but from what we've seen, scale is difficult. So it's something like each cow would need about 700 liters of water to grow enough Asparaginopsis for it per day. So then if you're looking at like hundreds of thousands or millions of head of cattle, you're looking at billions of liters of water, which is unfeasible to do such a large scale. So they have the ability to, it's almost like the battery supply versus a power plant. For us in the ocean, we can do vast scales of Asparaginopsis seaweed. I believe in the future we'll be working together where there'll be the onshore facilities and then us doing large scale offshore. So yeah, great timing for us. We say what's called a second mover advantage. There is some big companies that have raised large amounts of money, probably across the two big ones, well over $100 million invested to produce these onshore facilities, do a lot of the R&D, but also the market development, getting cattle farmers on board with it, consumers aware of the product. So, I see those companies as the pioneers of growing Asparaginopsis, and we now are able to, I guess from the success they've had, and you might have seen the AFR article recently that Sea Forest are eyeing an IPO. So there is a lot of excitement, a lot of opportunity there, and we fit in because of the success that they've had. So yeah, I've always say that they're the pioneers, and it gives us an advantage though. So we have a great team. We've got May online. Like I said, we work with one of Australia's leading phycologists, seaweed scientists. We have an in-house scientist, a whole bunch of advisors, really helping us get from where we have been in the last sort of 4 to 5 years as a small startup with getting a seaweed farm and now on that pathway to commercialization. I sort of look at the wider team as the cattle feedlots that we're working with, and we're really fortunate to have two really good West Australian cattle feedlots, being Pardue Wagyu Corporation and Kyla Feedlot. It's a big impact. So 3,000 hectares, you're looking at pretty much 1 million tons of carbon equivalents, methane, abated from being in the atmosphere. That's the equivalent of an LNG facility. And it's just the start. I want to get to 30,000 hectares like I saw in South Korea, and we're in the right place to do it. We can move the dial on climate change by doing what we're doing. So this is our pathway to market. There's Nick, he might be on the call, from Kyla Feedlot. It's awesome just to see these really innovative cattle farmers, really forward thinking, and yeah, great to work with. Like they are the climate heroes, as this whole opportunity. We're growing, it's easy for seaweed farmers to be climate heroes because we're growing seaweed, but for cattle farmers to make that really important change in their operations, yeah, we're honored to work with them. So to start with, we're doing that direct to farmer relationships, really building relationships with great cattle farmers. Value chain partners looks, like, the Coles supermarkets, the McDonald's, basically big corporates that have scope 3 emission targets and the need to reduce emissions. Wholesale feed suppliers, so your Milne Feeds, Grain Corps, will come in there at some stage at a larger scale, and we could potentially sell our seaweed to another seaweed producer. But for us, this is like that's our priority: direct to farmer, value chain partnerships, feed suppliers, and then supplying to other seaweed farmers. So, um, it's a great opportunity, but we've really got to define the economics. It's really important that we get our product to cattle farmers that basically no impact to their bottom line. And that looks like 50 cents per day per cow, which is on par with the synthetics at the moment. So we've done some work in the what we call the value staircase or value waterfall here. That's driven by these three value drivers. So this is what is important for our customers, being the cattle farmers. Like, what value do they see in using our product? So number one is the premiumization value, being able to sell their product as a premium product because it's low methane, like the Coles Finest range. We don't believe that's worth a huge amount, just based on our modeling, about 20 cents a kilo. So when I sort of talk about dollars per kilo, I'm talking about the sale price of our Asparagopsis per kilo. We have the feed conversion efficiency, and that is really what, talking to cattle farmers, that's what's important to them. Being able to reduce their feed quantities is like I said, 1% would make a big difference to them. So up to 7%. 7% is $8 a kilo of our feed, the sale price of our Asparagopsis feed supplement, and $8 a kilo is 50 cents per day per cow. So sort of what the cream on top is the carbon credit value, or how we look at it as the insetting value. So the ability for those value chain partners like Coles, McDonald's to reduce carbon emissions in their supply chain. If it is a voluntary method, it's around $2 a kilo, so it's not significant. If we have an ACCU, an Australian Carbon Credit Unit, and there is a methodology in the works for Asparagopsis, that's worth a lot, around $8 a kilo. So a little bit about our journey, founded in 2020, got our seaweed farm approved in late 2022. So we've had 3 seasons now of growing seaweed. We were awarded a $4 million government grant in 2023. So we're really supported by the state government of Western Australia, which is great. They've been big supporters. They see the opportunity to help cattle farmers to decarbonise. We still have $3 million of that grant left. So every dollar invested in Fremantle Seaweed up to $3 million will be matched by the state government. We did our first CSF, crowdsource funding raise, in March 2024, raising $1.2 million from 948 shareholders. So yeah, really supportive group of shareholders who backed us from the start. We're now I've got to move my screen here so I can see all this. So we're part of the KPMG High Growth Ventures program. At the start of this year, we secured our collaboration agreement with Future Feed this year as well to become licensees of Asparagopsis. So the next steps for us, we are currently growing Asparagopsis on the 32 hectares. We are raising money now to build a seed hatchery facility. And if you remember back what I was talking about with the tetrasporogenesis process, we're currently doing that here in this office, which isn't fit for purpose. We need to be able to do it at a facility that's built with seawater supply, to be able to do tetrasporogenesis, get the substrate. It's currently our biggest constraint, is being able to get enough seed material out to the 32 hectares. This current raise also enables us to complete the commercial feedlot trials that are starting next year with Pardue Wagyu Corporation, and Kyla feedlot, which completion of them, we'll be doing our first offtake agreements for our full crop here, the 96 tonnes for 5,000 head of cattle. That looks at about $1 million of revenue per year. So yeah, this round really is like we're on the path to commercialization now. You know, we've done the R&D phase. We're now looking to secure those offtake agreements. We need the hatchery nursery facility, commercial trial, R&D on our expansion sites. We've applied for the 3,000 hectares, but the way it works with Department of Fisheries, they don't just give away 3,000 hectares of water. You need to be able to prove you can do it. You need to do baseline surveys. We basically need to send some scientists up there to do the environmental monitoring and baseline. That from there we can do the full application for 3,000. And then, yeah, funding the team to the end of 2027 when we'll have those first offtake agreements. All right, that's it for the presentation. So what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and hand over to Tim for some questions.
Thanks, Chris. Comprehensive. Plenty of questions coming in. I'll kick off with one. You've got over 2,200 expressions of interest, and you've spoken to a number of those people who express their interest. What are you hearing back from potential investors? What are they asking?
Like a big one is ROI, return on investment, which we appreciate. So if I look back at our first CSF raise through Birchall, we raised $1.2 million from those 948 shareholders. That was at $5 a share. Offer document's not live yet, but we're going at $6.83 a share. So we have, I guess, ticks all the boxes that we wanted to achieve from that first round to get to this round, and provided that shareholder value that way. And then, there's the potential for exit events. Like I was pointing to the AFR article about Sea Forest. They have that. They've been going since, I think, 2018. So they've got a couple of years on us, but they're now eyeing an IPO, which is really exciting. I think any founder of a company, would be proud to be able to get to that IPO point and be able to expand operations.
Are they a Sea Forest a competitor to you, like direct competitor, or are you a different product? Can you just explain sort of that, and also then is it CH4 Global out of South Australian waters? Just a little bit for the uninitiated as to how you differ to those guys. How far ahead are they in market selling their product as well?
Yeah, look,
Yeah.
we are competitors, but in the Australian seaweed industry, we got our industry body, ASA. We sort of define it as this pre-competitive phase because the market's so big. The problem is growing enough seaweed at the moment. Like there is a massive demand, and we just can't supply at this point. So we'll be in a pre-competitive phase. Sea Forest and CH4 Global. Sea Forest were looking at offshore, but have now gone onshore. Same as CH4. So pretty big capex involved. I think CH4 Global's facility down in Louth Bay is about $50 million. And you can have a look on their website. It's about enough to do 4,500 head of cattle. They are looking to expand operations, and it goes back to the volumes of water you require. But that is the advantage for us. Growing in the ocean, now we've done the R&D to figure out tetrasporogenesis part of the life cycle. We have that opportunity to do large scale. So 3,000 hectares is almost 400,000 head of cattle.
Yeah. A few questions coming in just in relation to the impact on the marine ecosystem. Can you sort of answer those for us? How does what you're doing impact upon that? The impact of seaweed farming, et cetera, et cetera. So
we've got really strict our aquaculture license and lease conditions are very strict, and it sets out our environmental monitoring and management plan. We need to make sure that we're not having a negative impact on what we call the benthic habitat, so the critters that live on the sea floor. At our 32-hectare seaweed farm here, we use a type of anchor called a stingray anchor on sand. So it's called a stingray anchor because it works itself underneath the sand. And all we then have coming up is our chain riser rope to floats. We have done our baseline monitoring just to take a snapshot of what the seaweed farm, 32 hectares looked like before we moved in, and each year
mm,
we monitor
mm,
against it. Just making sure that there's no damage to seagrass, and there's not. We don't put any anchors anywhere near any seagrass. That there's no damage to, well, like by growing asparaginopsis at a large scale, it's not then creating more asparaginopsis on the reef. So we do this
mm,
macroalgal monitoring. So it is really strict, and as a seaweed farmer, I'm passionate about protecting the marine environment. I don't want to be going there destroying
mm.
anything. So at a large scale, it's exactly the same. That's why we need to do the R&D work up there to make sure we do the baseline monitoring. We do see a positive impact though. So we call them FADs, or fish attraction devices. Anytime you put anything in the ocean, it does attract marine biodiversity. And there is this opportunity with the Australian government's nature repair market coming online, that if we can measure the positive marine biodiversity that we're having, so the fact that there's more things growing because of our seaweed
Mm.
farm, we can potentially turn that into a marine biodiversity credit. But it is, yeah, caveat that that is a long way down the track. It's going to require decades of data to prove, but we can do that data collection here at the seaweed farm.
And Chris, how vulnerable is the seaweed farm to natural disasters, storm, cyclones, oil spills, those sort of things? Is that taken into account?
Yeah, absolutely. And I sort of point to other aquaculture industries in Western Australia. So a good friend of mine, James Brown, has Cygnet Bay pearl farming operations, and we have a big pearling industry in Western Australia with Pass Bailey. So there you're looking at a super premium product, very valuable
Mm,
pearls
mm,
sitting on long lines. You grow it exactly the same way as you do seaweed. So on long lines in the ocean, up in the northwest of Australia, which is prone to cyclones. And it's just all about anchors. You just need to ensure your anchors are big enough that they'll hold in case of a category 5 cyclone coming through. So it is important that we, make sure we design our equipment correctly. And we do. We work with an aquaculture equipment designer to really make sure we get the holding strength for our anchor points.
um, Moving on to sort of commercialization. You mentioned that you won't be sort of turning your first dollar until the trial finishes, and that'll be some stage in 2027. At that stage, then, will you have sort of agreements in place over the next 2 years for other cattle farmers other than Pardue and Kaylee to come on board? Will you be doing a sort of a sales process and sort of ready-made offtake agreements with others? And do you think that it's sort of just a matter of time? It's just a fait accompli. There'll just be a domino effect that everyone then will be, putting this in the feed for their cattle.
Yeah, look, what I might do is I might hand over to May for this question, Fremantle Seaweed Business Development Manager. So it's not just all me talking, because she has done a great job in securing those initial letters of intent. So over to you, May.
Thanks, Chris. And hi, everyone. So great to be here. Tim, it's a fantastic question. So, we are engaging with a range of different farmers in conjunction with our conversations with Kyla and Pardue Wagyu. And what we're seeing is a lot of interest coming through, both through our website, both through the outreach that we have as well. And what this commercial trial will do is it will help establish and build trust in our reputation with broader farmers within the WA market and the Australian market, so that as we start outreach direct to farmers, we'll have evidence of our production and the commercial benefits to farmers. And we're really looking to do that over the next few years, not to wait to the point that the commercial trial ends and then go out. We're
Mm.
already here right now having those discussions, speaking with us. Value chain partners to reach their customers, their suppliers, and to really work with the whole ecosystem in the Australian market, so that at that point, when we are ready, we will have, we will aim to have those offtake agreements ready to go as well.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And is the reception from farmers been, okay, listen, I can't wait, this is great, it's an easy sales process to a certain extent?
Yeah, Absolutely. We're certainly seeing with the early movers a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of excitement for asparagus. What we're hearing is they really appreciate that it is a natural product, that it has a really high emissions reduction factor comparative to the other methane inhibitors that are either on the market or are being developed at the same time. And there's, I guess, an excitement that we're in the throes, we're starting to produce asparagus on our lease, and that we're ready to, getting ready to be able to provide that at scale, because there has been discussion for the past 5 years around methane inhibitors, but not enough supply. And that's really where farmers are looking for, is to see that supply become available, and why the excitement is really live and quite strong and just growing more rapidly.
Yeah, a few questions then on that. Is there an impact on the health of the cow upon ingesting your supplement?
The research to date, and it's been quite extensive, of CSIRO, James Cook University, Meat and Livestock Australia, they've been undertaking this research for over 10 years now. And to date, there hasn't found any adverse health impacts on the cattle. I know one question that I'm receiving a lot that will come out of this is, well, what about the taste for cows as well, and the beef and the dairy? Does asparagus affect that? And the research has also shown that there's no effect. Anecdotally, some people have said actually it tastes better when they eat asparagus, but from a scientific point, it is not statistically significant. So if you love beef, if you love your dairy, it's not going to change. It's only going to become better and become a climate hero.
Yeah, and Chris, you were talking about the difference between grazing cattle and feedlot cattle. So if you're a farmer with grazing cattle, how are you feeding the supplement? Is that via a lick block, or is it a dry pellet, or how do you feed the grazing cattle?
Yeah,
Or
so
they're not part of the market, the immediate recipients at the moment?
yeah, for us, the early market will just be feedlot and dairy, and that's because they go to the same place to feed. You can get the dosage really consistently. So for feedlot, it's 3 times a day, dairy twice a day, and you get that really, consistent
Mm.
methane reduction and feed conversion efficiency. For grazing cattle, it's a bit trickier, so you need to find the delivery method, whether it's a lick block. You know, Sea Forest have just done a partnership with a company that uses the water supply for cattle to dose. So there is, technologies in the works to be able to get to grazing cattle. But I will also point to the fact that most grazing cows will end their lives in a feedlot to be conditioned for market. So there is an opportunity to get them at that point. But yeah, at this stage, the target market is feedlot and dairy.
And you talked earlier about one of the advantages being farmers wanting to go to the bank and prove that they're lowering their carbon emissions. How would they do that? One of the questions here from Mark. Thank you, Mark. How does a cattle farmer prove they reduce their emissions by X% to their bank? Do they show your invoice and the bank then proves obviously that they're working hard to reduce their methane emissions?
Yeah, so
I was going to say, I can answer this question if you want, Chris.
yeah, actually, you know a lot more about it. So yeah, over to you.
So the banks, how they're accounting for emissions at the moment is by estimation rather than on-farm emissions calculations, but that is changing. The banks are very much looking for ways to measure the on-farm emissions reductions, and there's a lot of different measurement tools that are coming out and being developed at this time. But one of the ways that the banks can ensure that there have been on-farm emissions reductions is very much seeing how much of our product has been sold and getting a guarantee from the farmer that that product has then been put into the feedlot system or the total mixed rations by the farmer itself. So having that invoice, having the quantity, and then being able to measure it. And what we know from the farmers that we're working with and engaging with is that when they mix the total mixed rations, they calculate and monitor each day how much percentage of product will go into the rations, and then how much is then fed and eaten by the cattle. So they have that data there. They can collate it, and then they can give that to the banks to be able to prove that emissions reduction factors as well.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Just jumping around a bit, back to future. There are a lot of questions about scale, Chris. So you talked about the 3,000 hectare farm, that license is from WA Fisheries. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And then how quickly can you get that up and running? So obviously, all going well, and we look at this in a positive light. You hit commercialization in 2027 after successful 400-day trials. You've got a number of different farms out there, cattle farmers wanting your product. May's done a terrific job in doing that, and you've got a massive pipeline of deals coming through with offtake agreements. How quickly can you scale to bring in a hell of a lot of seaweed from the current 32 hectares? Obviously going to be limited, but how quickly do you scale to up production 2 times, 3 times, quadrupling that in order to meet that demand? Obviously, there's going to be a lot of demand, and obviously you may have some supply constraints.
Yes, I mean, we're looking at a 100x, right, to get from 32 hectares to 3,000 hectares. It's in our 5-year roadmap, in our strategic plan. So we have applied for the lease through this DPIRS, the Department of Primary Industry and Regional Development, of which fisheries and aquaculture sit. But it is a process to make sure that we do all those things that I was talking about. The baseline survey is really important, so that you can show, okay, well, this is the current benthic habitat of that 3,000 hectares. Then you go through the application process, which needs stakeholder consultation. So we'll go to all the different other water users. There's other government departments, particularly up there. It's going to be the oil and gas companies that are decommissioning. So the ones we've spoken to so far are very supportive. They really need carbon credits, which is obviously a tricky one, that the fact that we have the potential to produce carbon credits, but then it could enable oil and gas producers to continue. But regardless of that fact, because of the safeguard mechanism the Australian government has brought in for oil and gas producers to reduce production, the only way that they can continue to operate is by buying carbon credits. So there is there's a good opportunity up in that northwest because of that. I think it's very supportive stakeholders. Like I said before, the state government have been very supportive of Fremantle seaweed. They do see it as part of their economic diversification plan. So WA, as everyone knows, is very resource heavy with oil and gas and mining. But the current Cook Labor government has brought out this economic diversification plan, and aquaculture is a really big opportunity there. So, but yeah, as far as timeline goes, it will take time, and it will take capital as well to get up to 3,000 hectares. It's a lot of anchors, it's a lot of rope. But we've proven we can do it at 32 hectares, and we've got that stage development plan to get up to the 3,000 hectares.
And the lease term with the government, how long would that be?
It's 21 years with the option to extend for a further 21 years. Yeah, we have our current lease here out to, I think it's 2042, 2043, signed by the Minister of Fisheries.
Question in relation to the impact of ocean warming on your development and growth of seaweed. Is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually currently in a workshop for the Aquaculture Council of Western Australia where we're looking at the impacts of climate change. And I think particularly for us with our Asparagopsis armata, which is the cold water variety, I probably skipped over that. There's 2 types of Asparagopsis, the tropical version, Asparagopsis taxiformis, which grows really well here. We get the 10 to 11 months. And then the cold water variety, which we've got on our long lines at the moment, we get about 3 to 4 months. Potentially that will shorten and move further south. Bureau of Meteorology are predicting marine heat waves to be the norm in the next sort of 10 to 20 years, which is pretty scary. So, then you look at what we're doing, and we do have that ability to take some action to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and we need to be doing everything we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce the global warming that's happening. We need to keep below the 1.5 Paris Agreement target that I know we've gone over now, but they look at it as a decade. So yeah, we're fighting the good fight to do it, but there will be impacts.
Couple of questions on future feed. Can you talk about that, the license, and just a little bit more intel on that? There's probably 3 or 4 questions here, all pretty similar, but just talk a little bit about that license with future feed.
Yeah, sure. So we have a cooperation agreement with Future Feed. That sort of we're working with them to do our commercial feedlot trials. Once we've completed them, it's a bit of a process for CSIRO that you need to be able to show that you can do the product formulation, get 6 milligrams per gram of bromoform, and then dose it correctly. They're not just letting everyone, either harvest or grow seaweed and feed it to cows. You need to do it, according to the very scientific processes, and there's a feed supplement quality assurance program called FAMIQS that we're working through all the steps to be accredited with that standard. So we need to get the future feed. So we do the feedlot trial, we do the FAMIQS, and then we become future feed licensees. But we're not yet the future feed licensee. We have a few steps to go, but they're in place with the cooperation agreement.
In relation to commercialization, a few questions. Obviously, break even and profitability would come after that in 2027 when you do start sort of turning on the revenue chains coming through there. How long, depending upon the size of this raise, obviously, will this cover you enough in terms of funding for your monthly burn rate through from rest of 25 into 26 and 27? Hard question to answer, I know.
Well, I mean, and you look at it as well with the 5 million, there's also the 3 million of state government funding there. A lot of that is for infrastructure, which is, the high capex items that we have to do. I mean, it's not the $100 million they're doing over East, but, significant amounts of money. It gets us to, end of 2027, this capital raise at 5 million. And then we need to, at that point, we'll have our 96 tons of Asparagopsis, the offtake agreement for that full amount, which is 5,000 head of cattle. Depends on the sale price. At $8 a kilo, it's about 800K in revenue. At $12, say we are being rewarded for the carbon insetting value of it. It's over $1 million. We will have sustainable operations at that point, but it's only for 32 hectares. So to then go up to 3,000 hectares, we will need to do that big expansion, which is a lot of capital, but it gets us to large amounts of revenue at 3,000 hectares. I think we're looking over 100 million in revenue and around 10 mil of cost. So it's a big project, but there will be costs associated to get to that point.
And questions around then the labour. How many, the efficiency of labour, how many staff would you need? How many staff do you have now on the 32 hectares? How many staff would you need then for the 3,000 hectares? Obviously, the WA government sees it as a great employment opportunity, hence their $4 million grant to you. Can you give sort of an insight into what that looks like?
Yeah, so it's about using vessels efficiently. And it's what I saw in South Korea. So South Korea have a very similar GDP to Australia, but also their salaries are about 70% of Australian. So it's pretty close, and they are doing large scale seaweed aquaculture. So here in Australia, currently, we have a small team operating a vessel. We use contractors at the moment to keep the costs down. So Mike Rule from Drift Consulting and Glenn Dibbon, who's a mussel farmer, sort of, we contract them out as required. Plus myself and Julia, our scientists, jump on as often as possible too. But really it's about, okay, how do we do that at 3,000 hectares? So we've done a lot of modeling on what that looks like. And basically we can get it to 3 vessels and then either like a processing facility, a hatchery and processing facility on an island up in the northwest, or on a vessel, because it can be on a vessel as well. And there's some really good examples of this that have come out of the kelp seaweed industry in Europe, where you have a big vessel that's able to do the hatchery and the processing, and then smaller vessels that do the seeding and harvesting. So typically a vessel for us will be 1 skipper and 2 deckhands. And they're not, the vessels that are doing the actual seaweed seeding and harvesting aren't large. They're sort of around 10 meters. They have the ability to pick up long lines and drive along the long lines and then separate out row lines through a separate winch and pulley system to go through a stripper that strips the seaweed out into tubs. Those tubs then go into either onto the island for processing or onto a vessel for processing, and then processed in situ there. The closer you can process your product to the harvest, the better. So there's no bromoform loss. Um, so, potentially we're looking at the three vessels, with three people, a sort of nine marine team plus scientists onshore and processing, sort of around 15 to 20 up in the northwest. And that's why, it is a good opportunity to reuse and repurpose that infrastructure up there. Like there's already camps and accommodation up there that we can use.
Couple of different questions. I want to jump around a bit, different subjects. I'm trying to get to as many questions as I can. Is it an annual harvest? Is it a number of different harvests within 1 year? And how long? Just to reiterate or to repeat, how long does it take to grow the seaweed from as you said, from spore to to full product and harvested?
Yeah, so it does depend a little bit on the season. I'll break it down right from the start. So we do that process where we get the tetrasporophytes to go through tetrasporogenesis. So that process does take a while to get really clean tetrasporophytes and then have a standing seed bank that you can then do the tetrasporogenesis. But once you've done that, it's the seed bank's there. You don't need to continually do it. Like you need to add to it, but it's just kind of a bank of seed material waiting. So once you then have the tetraspores that have settled onto the substrate, which is basically the twine that we take out to the ropes in the ocean and unravel the twine onto the ropes. From that point, it's about an 8 to 10 week growth phase to get to the full gametophyte. At which point, when we harvest it, we don't have to just remove the whole gametophyte. It can be basically pruned and regrow back from there. And some of the R&D we've done, we've seen that there's higher bromoform in the gametophytes that we've pruned back and then have grown back. But what we see in other seaweed industries is as they harvest, then they reseed, just so you make sure you're not stripping too much back and you're just getting that continual growth on your line. So for us here with the 10 to 11 months of Asparagopsis taxiformis we get, we're getting sort of 10 weeks to get to the full mature plants, like up to sort of 4 crops per year. So it's great. Like it's a good place for us to be able to prove a lot of this up as well. Like, I mean, when we talk about those processes of, seeding and harvesting, at the moment we can get the 3 tons per hectare, but we've got a long way to go. Like we need to do more research into getting higher yields from the ropes.
Other animals other than cattle, is there a pig, sheep, applicability to other animals?
Yeah, so it's what we call ruminant livestock. So any animal that has a rumen stomach. So yeah, goats and sheep, but their methane emissions aren't anywhere near as much as cattle. So cows are that initial market for us.
Okay. Question in and around crowdfunding. Why the second time down crowdfunding path rather than heading out to VC, or have you've gone down the VC path and you've been successful there or unsuccessful there? Can you just give some insight into different methods of raising capital? You mentioned that, subject to getting the license or the lease from the WA government with 3,000 hectares, you'll obviously need more capital then at that stage. Just interested for 990 existing shareholders, you're probably going to get another 500 to 1,000 from this round. What do they need to know about in that sense? And then just a final add-on to that, this round, there's a question there. This round is for ordinary shares. Can you just confirm that it's for ordinary shares? There isn't a dividend. Just running through that for you, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I guess to start with quickly, it is for ordinary shares, and at this point, not paying a dividend. So why CSF, crowdsource funding?
Yeah.
So yeah, it worked really well for us in March 2024. We have 948 CSF investors from that virtual round that have been really supportive, got in early at $5 per share. I guess saw it as a big opportunity, saw the ability to take climate action through their investment. We then went through KPMG's High Growth Ventures program, which started the beginning of this year. And so we've reached out to a whole range of different sort of the institutional investors like VCs, impact investors, family offices. So family offices are hard, like they're hard to find. There's not that many that publicly put their details out. So you really need to work with partners to get a hold of them. Impact investors, there's been a lot of support from them, but they don't typically invest this early at seed round. They will invest Series A and later. So they want to be able to see those, commercial pathways are in place, offtake agreements are signed before they're just, there's, I guess they're more risk adverse to doing, their investments typically a later stage. And then the VCs will typically take more investment. Unfortunately, in Australia, just obsessed with AI. And as much as, we've often people are like, oh, we'll just tack some AI onto your business. Well, like it's going to take people on boats seaweed farming. It's like AI can't farm seaweed, and there will be potential for AI way down the track as we look to optimize crops and yields. But at this early stage, it's just, often I just get that, just if you want to seek investment from a VC, and, we had a report back from KPMG, basically said that all of the Australian VC deals done in the last year, 53% have been AI, which is unprecedented. Normally, you don't have a sector, whether it's technology or health tech or climate tech, go over 25%. So unfortunately, it has been a bit tricky. I guess also with what's happening in America, you've got Trump just completely winding back climate targets, and then that has a flow-on effect that VCs kind of go, okay, well, let's do less in the climate tech space. That, and then overall, the VC deals have massively dropped off since I think it peaked around 2020, 2021, and it's dropping off. And that I think is a reflection on interest rates being higher, that they don't need to do much with their money to make money. They can just sort of sit in bank accounts. Whereas when you have lower interest rates, there's more incentive for VCs to do the deals. So we might see a bit more VC investment coming online. I guess from my perspective, I really like our CSF investors. Like, they're in it for the right reasons. They want to see commercial outcomes from Fremantle Seaweed, which we're very passionate about making, and we see this huge opportunity for the seaweed sector in Australia. They also want to see climate action, and if I compare that to some of the other types of investors I've spoken to, like there's so much focus on, like I guess driving our valuation down to get a better deal, and it's less about the climate impact and more about them getting themselves the best deal possible.
Yeah, that's a good answer. No, I mean, there is a massive interest from VCs into AI, and at the expense of all the other guys like yourself. Couple of other questions. I'm conscious that we're nearly hitting the hour mark. A few questions coming in just in relation to concerns around the rope and its impact on marine migration, entanglement of marine life. Can you just answer that one, please?
Yeah, so it goes back to our environmental monitoring and management plan. We have a whole section in there about marine mammal entanglements. So we can't put a seaweed farm in a whale migration pathway. And a lot of this comes out of learnings from the Western rock lobster industry. Fortunately for us, Asparagopsis seaweed, you don't need to go deeper than 10 meters. Like really, it grows best somewhere between the surface and about 3 meters. So the areas we're looking at in the northwest, 32-hectare seaweed farm we have, if you're in WA and around Freo, you can see it from the beach. If you just go down to CY O'Connor Beach, like it's 50 meters offshore. It's in shallow waters where whales won't be coming into. Similar to up north, that it's shallow areas. There's nothing there that's deeper than about 6 meters. So it's, at the start, it's definitely something that kept me awake at night, that there could be a whale entanglement. But we have the environmental management practices in place to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place from our location. And if it does, we have the response procedures in place to deal with it pretty quick. There's a hotline you call basically in Western Australia, fish watch. That as soon as there's any report of that, DBCA will be out there really quickly and help us as the operator to reduce the harm to the animal if that does happen. We do see dolphins. Dolphins are a lot more agile and don't become entangled in our. So our long line's pretty simple. I don't have a schematic that I can share here. It just means I'd have to open up a folder somewhere and try and find it. But basically, it's just a long line. So it's just a rope that's horizontal in the ocean, kind of like that. And then there's riser ropes that go to the anchors. And then the dropper lines hang vertically off of that where we grow the seaweed. They're spaced far enough apart that this is in our management plan as well, that you can't create a loop that's small enough that a dolphin could swim through and get lassoed, basically. Like the dropper lines are, far enough apart that a dolphin can swim through. Seals as well. I don't know if anyone follows me on LinkedIn, but I put up a video last week of a seal just sort of playing around one of our long lines. But yeah, we have the management procedures in place, and it comes from the Western rock lobster industry that have had to really come up with those procedures.
Mm. And what's the lifespan of one of the ropes? How long do they last for?
Yeah, so this is a good question because we were pitching to a impact investor in WA that is doing a lot of work in marine plastics. So our ropes are polypropylene, so they are made of plastic. The reason we have to do that as opposed to natural fibers is natural fibers are much coarser, and then you get a lot more biofouling on the rope. And then you have to basically, you can't reuse the rope all the time. Whereas our ropes, they will last 10 years plus of us cleaning them. And then once they're done, we have to recycle them responsibly.
Question then, in relation to, is it the only, is the seaweed supplement the only way to reduce carbon with cows, or there's synthetics there, and why would someone choose seaweed over the synthetics?
Yeah, there was quite a bit of backlash, as I said earlier, to Coles when they announced the fact that they're using Bovaer, a synthetic supplement. It's similar to Asparagopsis seaweed. There's no danger to the public eating beef or dairy with this 3-NOP chemical, but it's the perception, right, that it is a chemical that's getting added to my beef and dairy. So Asparagopsis is a natural, it's just seaweed that you're feeding to cows. So that's our advantage there. That's our competitive advantage, the fact that we are natural product. There's no impact to the cattle farmers' organic certification. There's no chemical additive. There are other ways, some of them natural for reducing methane, changing the diet of the cow. I think there's some other extracts out of mushrooms, but none of them have that really high methane reduction that we're getting. I think there's ones where you can feed the cows daisies or daffodils or something like that, and they get like a 5% reduction, whereas seaweed's getting 80%.
Couple of last questions for you. Conscious of time for those who are online. A few questions just in around risks, and it's very broad, but what are the key risks for you in the next 2 years in relation to getting to commercialization? So investors are coming in, they're putting their money in, they're banking on the fact that at some stage in 2027 you'll turn your first dollar. It'll come quickly, given that on the back of the take up of the cattle farmers and the obvious benefits. But what are the risks in the next 2 years for you not to be able to achieve that?
I'll go with, maybe top three. So first one is access to capital. That is the big risk. Like if we don't raise money now and we don't build the seed hatchery facility and processing facility and undertake the commercial feedlot trials, it will be, I'll do whatever I can to, slowly in a very lean manner get through to the same goal, but it's going to be very tricky and it will take a lot longer.
Yeah.
Second one then is cost of production. So we've got to make sure that we can produce Asparagopsis seaweed so that there is no impact to the cattle farmer's bottom line. And at this stage, it's early days of ensuring that we get consistent on our on our production costs, and they are higher at the moment because we've got a 32-hectare lease, and we're actively putting in practices to make sure we get higher yields, consistent quality of our Asparagopsis supplement, to make sure that our costs do remain at that $8 per kilo that cattle farmers will pay. We then get that sort of carbon in setting, I guess, cream on top of it with the value chain partners. And then say third one would be market adoption. So, we have these really great cattle farmers that we're working with. We need to really, prove with them to that massive market opportunity that Asparagopsis feed supplement, when done in a sort of sustainable, safe way of dosing as per CSIRO, like it does get the methane reductions been proven, but getting that feed conversion efficiency. If we show that feed conversion efficiency of the 7%, even if it's not the full 7%, we then get that mass market adoption where cattle farmers will be like, okay, well, we want that just purely for the feed conversion efficiency and not as much for the methane reduction.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'd like to thank you both. Very comprehensive, and apologies to those that have asked questions that we haven't got to. We're sort of conscious of time. We've been going for well over an hour now, but just in summary, for those that are still online, the offer does open to privately to those that have expressed their interest on Thursday, sort of around mid-morning. That's this Thursday, the September 25th. You'll receive an email if you have registered your interest, letting you know that the offer is open, encouraging you to obviously come in if you're interested. But thank you to Chris and thank you to May. Exceptionally comprehensive. We've had triple-digit figures here in terms of attendees and still there now. But thank you again, and we look forward to a successful raise with you.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Cheers.